Hello, this is Wes Bridle, and this is another Kingdom Calling Economic Update video. All of these videos are short updates on what's going on in the economy now. If you want to know the big picture, it's important that you go watch the free video, The Coming Storm. There's a link to do that right here. I'd encourage you if you haven't seen that. So jumping in, this is the second of 3 videos on what's going on in Europe. The European situation, if you're an American, might not seem important to you, but absolutely what happens there is definitely spilling over and affecting the economy in the United States. So it's extremely important, and that seems to be where the lightning rod is at the moment. So that seems to be the big implosion that's happening. I'm not sure the Eurozone as a monetary union is going to last through the end of this year. It might, but it's against the ropes. So let me jump into some details. Most European banks are still holding Greek sovereign debt on their books at 79% face. They had to take a 20% cut as part of the deal the governments are making on what Greece owes them, because Greece can't possibly pay back what they owe. The reality is they can't even possibly pay back 80%. But that's what these banks have done. So they said, okay, we're going to mark our assets down on our books. But the reality is there's nowhere near that they're actually going to get paid. So all these European banks are in serious trouble. RBS took a 50% haircut. So they're a lot more honest as far as the market. And a month ago, I think that's what they're trading at. Now, that's even very conservative. The reality is these banks are going to get very little from this Greek debt or even some of the other surrounding countries. So it's a difficult situation because the countries are in trouble and the banks are in trouble. And because the countries set up rules that made the banks have the incentive to lend money to the countries, they were able to do their books in much more powerful ways, keep a lot less reserves if they were holding sovereign debt. They held it as if it had no risk. Well, obviously it's got a tremendous amount of risk, and now these banks are in serious, serious trouble. If Germany's bailed out the European banks, so a lot of people just think, Germany, you're just being ridiculous. Why don't you just agree to bail out all these other countries? But if they can't. So you have, the sovereign risk, where the sovereign countries can't afford their debt, and you have these massive banks that can't afford to pay what they owe. If Germany just agreed to bail out all these banks, they'd immediately be at 200% debt to GDP, which means they would be right up there with Japan at the highest level of debt per the level of the economy in the world. So right now, Germany is considered this bastion of stability and conservatism, even though they still have over 60% debt, which isn't, there's certainly countries with better, but they're a big, strong economy and their debt's better than most of the Western countries. If they bail out all these other countries, they'd be the worst among us. So they can't possibly afford to do all the bailouts that everyone's wanting them to do. Let's see, austerity is crushing the Greek economy so badly that even with the little they've done, the deficit is higher. So this is a sad thing about the socialism that's been going on. You get your economy addicted to socialism and more pulling money from the people and giving it to other people. If your economy starts to be based on that, it doesn't grow very well. So it gets into these problems that they're into now. But then when you want to get out of it, if you stop that spending, stop giving money to all the people, well, the economy crumbles. And so that's what's happening. They're using austerity measures to cut back the spending of the government, and so that they have a smaller deficit. Yet when they do this, less money is circulating into the economy because the economy is so dependent on the socialism that the actual tax revenues that come in are much less, and then the deficits end up being even worse. Even though that's really the only way out, in the short term, it makes things worse. And so that's the difficult situation that they're in, and that's why it's one of the many reasons why Greece and Italy are revolting against the austerity that the rest of the world is putting on them, because it hurts the economy, for one. It also, of course, really ticks off the people, and these are politicians that don't want to tick off the people. So when, let's see, one of the Italian politicians made a great comment. He said, the EU may be unworkable. We pretended to be Germans, but it was an illusion. So the reality is the German people tend to work hard, save hard, and they know that they can't spend more that they're bringing in, either as a people or as a country. The Italian people, as people, actually are like that. They're good savers. But the Italian government is, this socialist utopia that we can spend more money than we make and everything's going to work out and be fine, and it's just not happening. So the Italian, apparently it's the Italian way, and it has always been for a long, long time, the Italian way to do things like that. But again, that's why if you remember, if you knew, the Italian lira used to be really worthless. It had a tiny, tiny value compared to the dollar or the Deutschmark. And the reason for that is they were constantly spending more than they were bringing in, and to compensate for that, the Italian lira would decrease in value. Well, now they don't have that mechanism to balance the situation because they have the same euro that everybody else has. So the euro doesn't go down in value, and so Italy's suffering. The Deutsche Bank, which is the German bank, most powerful bank in Europe, their CEO admitted here about a week ago that most banks would not survive marking the sovereign debt to market. He said something like, it's an open secret. Most of the bankers weren't really admitting this, but here the most powerful banker in Europe comes out and admits, look, no, the banks aren't going to survive if we do our books honestly and show you what our assets are really worth. It's not nearly worth what we owe, and we're all going to be insolvent. The market's already known this, but here you have the biggest banker in Europe admitting it. UBS says, which is a bit, giant, I think the biggest Swiss bank, says the euro should have never been created. CEO of Dexia, which is the largest Belgian bank, instead of messing around with this, he just quit. So he decided the easiest way out for him of this mess was just to get out of there and not be responsible anymore. It's kind of funny. That's probably is the best way. I mean, he realizes there's nothing that can be done, and so he's just getting out of there personally. It's unfortunately, it's a sad situation for all of us that have to live through this, but it's an honest answer. Greece default risk rises to 98% within 5 years. So the credit default swap market is showing that there's a 98% risk of default for Greece. That's pretty much, it's going to default. Central Bank's chief economist Stark, who's a German, he's leaving he left the ECB, the European Central Bank, because he differs on them buying the sovereign bonds of these PIGS countries, Portugal. I haven't heard Ireland much in the news lately, but the PIGS acronym is Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And they're just very against it, and so he's leaving. So it's the European Central Bank's losing the credibility of the Germans as Axel Weber left, I think it was in February. All the staunch, good, conservative bankers from Germany are leaving, and so that's, it's a big sign that there's big problems there. Let's see, Greece has not met their budget targets, and more bailouts based on compliance are in the air. So the deal with the bailouts that have already been promised were that Greece had to meet certain austerity measure deadlines for their deficits, and if they did so, they'd continue to get the bailout money that's already been promised. Well, they're not meeting those deadlines. The IMF was in there, a week or two ago. They just pulled out because they were upset that Greece was just refusing to make the hard cuts, hard choices needed. And so it's an open question whether they're going to get the bailouts or not. That's probably what's in the news today, that they will get those. Again, I haven't had time to watch what's the news. The news is happy about Europe today. I didn't bother to see why, because the end game is known. Whether or not the politicians in Europe have said something that makes the market feel good today. There's really only one end solution to this. Well, again, there's two ways it can go, but neither of them are pretty. 8 billion more euro due Greece this month, and so it's an open question whether that gets paid to them or not. Northern European countries see that Greece must default, so put themselves deep in debt just to see Greece default in a year or two anyways. This is, sorry, my shorthand, reminding myself what to talk about. These Northern European countries, they want to be reasonable, they want to be neighborly, they want to be helpful. So up till now, they've been willing to give certain bailouts to these other countries. But at the same time, they're not idiots, and they realize that if they pay the massive amount of money necessary to these southern European countries, then they will themselves be broke, and they realize that those countries really won't even be in any better shape. They will have consumed a lot more money, but they'll still be in trouble. And so they have to be really idiotic to agree to those terms, and yet that's what the kind of people in those other countries are wanting them to do. So it's a difficult no-win situation, because the other alternative is horrible also. You just pull out of the Euro Union, you have defaults. I mean, all those are ugly situations. There's not a good answer to this. But you know, why should they make a really horrible decision for their own people when it's not even really going to help the other people? That's a situation that Europe's in. The third video, I'm going to wrap this up on the European situation. Again, if you haven't seen the Coming Storm video, I highly recommend it. There's a link to do so for free. And thank you for watching. God bless.